Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. I am Nicole, and I'll be your host for the next hour. I'm joined today by Jeff Ackert, President and CEO of Cascade Copper. Hi, Jeff.
Hello there, Nicole. How are you today?
Excellent. Thanks for joining me today. Cascade is a Canadian exploration company advancing a portfolio of copper and gold projects in both Ontario and British Columbia. Now, since I last spoke with the team in May of last year, the company has continued progressing exploration across several key assets. And in 2026 could be an important year as Cascade moves from early stage target generation towards drilling targets. Today, we'll talk about what has changed over the past year, what the exploration results are really telling us, and what investors should be watching next.
Thank you very much, Nicole. And what I'll do is I'll go through a little bit of preliminary information for those people that aren't familiar with the Cascade Copper story. So a little bit of a preamble, and then we'll get into the what we're really keen about this year is to get in and talk about some of the projects that we plan to do some drilling on. So we'll continue here right away. So there will be some forward-looking statements, so keep that in mind as we go through the deck here. So as I mentioned, just a little bit of a preamble about the company. Obviously, the first thing we want to talk about is, what's our market cap, how many shares do we have outstanding, so on and so forth. So we see here that the company is relatively young, only three years old this April, listed on the CSE, 64 million shares outstanding at the moment, 3.4 million stock options, 17 million warrants. Average price of the warrants is about 5.5 cents. Fully diluted at 85 million. Market cap, depending on the day, anywhere from $3.5 to $4.5 million dollars. Insider ownership is about 15%. So we've got quite a bit of skin in the game between directors and advisors and so on. Going from there, who is Cascade Copper? Well, myself, President CEO, as Nicole had mentioned. My VP of Exploration is Shannon Baird. I've worked with him off and on over the last 10 years or so. British Columbia, down in Jamaica, some projects in Peru, and so on. So we've got a good relationship, and he's an excellent geologist and really is up to speed on not only copper porphyry systems, but VMS systems, which are important for our projects. Yannicka is our CFO. She's a fractional CFO, so we share her with a few other companies. Works out well. We've got Darcy, Allison, and Sam as directors, and they contribute quite a bit to keeping the company on track. We've added a couple of advisors to our company. One is Neil Murata, a fellow I've known for many, many years. He and I worked together at Orezone Resources back in the early 2000s. And he's now running a company called Sun Summit, doing extremely well with gold and copper projects in BC in the Tutagon area, having some good success there. And Noah, he's running a more or less a sister company called Ashley Gold, and we share a few directors and a few other things. So he's come on board as an advisor, mostly capital markets, and it's a great team that we've got going forward here. So now let's talk about why Cascade Copper is exploring and what they're exploring and why. So one of the things that we've decided right off the bat with the company is that we don't want to go out and really dilute the company wholesale right off the bat. We'd like to keep a strong hold on the share structure. We'll do strategic investments or financings to get investors in the door, just to kind of, when the day comes that we have that drilling success, then the stock can take off quite nicely, and our shareholders can be rewarded for that. One of the other things that we want to look at is the projects that we put in the company, and the ones we have put in the company. Certain criteria that we want to look at. Some of them are in areas that maybe have been overlooked. Some of the projects we've got, they've been historic, and they've got quite a bit of data, which is very useful these days. And obviously the critical metals that are in demand right today and going forward. So those were kind of the criteria we wanted to bring into the company, and then of obviously getting the right management team, and I think we've got that in place for sure. Jurisdictions for us, I mean, it was important for us to be in Canada for many reasons: stable governments, strong mineral resource laws, good jurisdictions for exploration. The other thing too is the availability of flow-through shares in Canada, which is a great incentive for investors, but it also helps us raise money and get work done on the ground. Commodities, like we said, critical metals. So copper, we'll take some of the gold that comes with these things as well. Silver, molybdenum. Some of the other projects we found have some antimony and some tungsten, which is great today. And obviously the geology is what's important at the end of the day. Is, you know, you have to have the right geology to get the right metals out of the ground. So all of that is important for us, and that's our focus going forward. So let's talk about the projects. Now, we do have 5 projects. Here's the list of them here, but we're going to just focus on 2 of them today because they are the 2 that we will be drilling this year. So Copper Plateau, which is a British Columbia copper porphyry system, is focused for today's topic. But we have 3 other ones in BC. I just want to make sure people are aware of that we're just not a two project company. The other one is Centrefire, which is a VMS type of deposit, and that one is in Ontario. So we'll get into some details with these as we go forward here. Okay, where are we? Copper Plateau. We're south central BC, in an area that's known as the Quesnel terrain, and it's the #1 copper jurisdiction basically in Canada. The country's largest copper deposit that's in production right now is called Highland Valley. It belongs to Teck, and you can see that the numbers up here are pretty substantial, over 1 billion, or very close to 1 billion tons of reserves and resources. And in production, as I said, it's the biggest copper producer in Canada right now. So it's a neighbor within about 100 kilometers of us within this Quesnel terrain. The other one of note is the one down, you see it here at the bottom, Copper Mountain. And it's another production situation. Hudbay is the operator there. And again, it's 1 billion tons of reserves and resources. So we're in the right terrain. You know, location is important for anything. If you can be close to head frames and production, you know you're in the right spot. And another project that, you know, I just want to let people know that we're very close to is Kodiak Copper's MPD project, and they're making some very good strides in getting towards a production situation there. They've come up with their first mineral resource estimate. So, as I said, location is important. We're right in the thick of things here with our Copper Plateau project. As I mentioned previously, historic data is important to us. I mean, if you were to go out and spend that money to do what's been done in the past, like in this case, it would probably be $10 million or more to be spent to get, you know, the information that we've got in hand right now. So historic data, which includes drilling, 99 drill holes. There's been airborne geophysics. There's been on-the-ground geochemical sampling, IP geophysics, and so on. So all of that is important. And I think what's important for us too is the fact that we had access to all of that data. And I'll show you some of the results that we've come up with by looking at the data, going through it, making sure that it is good quality, but then putting it into 3D database and visualizing it in 3 dimensions, which has been fantastic for us. And I think it's really cracked the nut on why we like this project so much and why we want to get in and do some drilling on it. So we've been on the ground for the last year and a half, ground truthing, looking at you know, the lay of the land, and I'll show you what we've found as we've done our work. This is just a summary of what historic work has been done. So the bottom line is quite a bit, actually. So this is just an example of what we've done with the historic data. So this is airborne geophysics, magnetics, and resistivity. Really shows a lot of structure. It shows where our deposit, well, our near deposit is, where most of the drill holes, you can see the black dots there. Most of the drilling has been done. But just visualizing this, but also looking at it in context has been very important for us. So we'll go to the next slide here. Soil sampling. This is quite impressive. When we first saw this, it was like fantastic. It really shows a great relationship between not only copper, which you see on the left screen, but also the molybdenum on the right screen. And this is quite unique for this deposit to have this amount of this tenor of moly or molybdenum in the system. And this is what makes us very similar in deposit style to what we see up at Highland Valley, Teck's Highland Valley Copper Mine, which is, like I said, about 100 kilometers away. So getting this relationship and looking at the distribution of the soil geochemistry is quite important. But what we've been able to do, and I'll show you this in a second here, is the relationship of the mineralization on surface, but also how it correlates with the magnetics and how it correlates with the IP geophysics. And we'll look at that in the next slide here. So this, as I said, we've now put all of this information into a 3D database. And we've looked at the magnetics, we've done magnetic inversions, we've done IP geophysics inversions, we've laid that in with the soil geochemistry and the previous drilling and put it all together. And now we can see what the relationship is between all of these. And what we're finding is that chargeability with the IP, magnetic depletion, where there's actually a reduction in magnetic signature, soil geochemistry on the surface, all is saying this is where your underground mineralization is. So I'll show you the next slide here, which is quite impressive, I think, is these areas we've outlined that have all of these characteristics similar to what we're seeing at the main zone that has been drilled with the 99 drill holes. So we're seeing similarities along these three other areas: to the northwest, to the southwest, and southwest, and to the southeast. So if you notice on this diagram here, we've got some cross-section lines, and we'll go to those next and show you what the implications are. Maybe I'll just hit this one first. Yeah, so what we've got here, if you can imagine basically a cross-section across that line, which was the B plus or B prime line, and it's showing on the left-hand side where the drill holes were, the magnetic signature in the area, and the high geochemistry on surface. You know, if you look further up that northwest trend, we're seeing high geochemistry. We're seeing low magnetic signature. And we've seen a couple of very shallow drill holes in this area that are showing copper and moly mineralization. So this has got us quite excited about getting on the ground and doing some drilling. Now, our first phase, and this is what it's all about today, is the drilling. Where would we drill next at Copper Plateau? Well, our first stab, our first couple of holes will certainly be in this area here. And I'll show you why that is in the next slide. But we're going to look at sort of the extensions of this main zone, not only at shallow depths in the north and the south, but also at depth. And we'll go to the next slide here, and I'll show you what we're talking about here. So if you can see this here, the main amount of drilling was done sort of in that central area where it says drill intercepts are, greater than 1% copper equivalency. So these are sort of thematic colored scheme beneath the surface that shows where we've got the higher grade copper. But you can see that the surface also has lots of copper showing up in the soil geochemistry, but not a lot of drilling off to the south and to the north here. So these two areas will obviously be our first priority for getting in and doing some more drilling at Copper Plateau. And one of the cool things is that in this area here, during our ground truthing, We've actually found some very nice high-grade surface samples veining with copper, molybdenum, bornite, chalcopyrite, just stunning numbers with values over, if you can see in the right-hand side here, over 11% copper, 0.17% moly, 1.5 grams of gold, which is stunning, and as you can see, almost 130 grams per ton of silver. So when we see that on surface, and we see that the drilling hasn't really even covered this area, you can see why we're so keen to get out here and look at this area here. And the other reason why we want to go at depth is that, maybe go back to this slide previously, you can see that there are some drill holes that were done, relatively deep. I think there was about 300 to 350 meters down hole, which is vertically maybe close to 300 meters, which is nothing in these porphyry systems, that there was some pretty decent intersections of over 1% copper in these areas. So you can see why we're so excited to get on the ground and get in and do some drilling here, is just that, the previous drilling is showing us there's great stuff at depth. The geochemistry and the magnetics are showing us that there's lots of stuff to look at along strike. And surface sampling is showing us that there's some great rock samples and mineralization on surface that we'd really like to follow up with. Now, we did do a quick review of some of the older core. Luckily, we've got that in a storage in Cranbrook. We're planning to get out and do some more work on that before the summer. And you can see some of these intersections here with some very decent copper and some really nice mineralization in these zones. So basically, that's the story at Copper Plateau. Drilling around the main zone, following up some of the intersections that were peripheral to the main zone, and then looking at maybe in a phase 2 program during the rest of the year at our northwest and southwest areas from the main zone. So lots of targets to look at there. So in summary, at Copper Plateau, we've got maybe up to 2,500 meters in a phase 1 drilling program, 5 to 8 holes in this year. We do also plan to do a property-wide induced polarization survey that will sort of tie everything together. As I mentioned before, we've got this correlation with high chargeability with copper mineralization at depth. So let's look at that in the other parts of the project area. So that certainly will help. Looking at the historic drill hole that's stored in Cranbrook. One of the things that we're doing also is looking at alteration mapping within the whole area, and that sort of gives us a vector into where more mineralization could be. So another tool in the toolbox for us. Continue to look at prospecting sampling. Now, one of the things I didn't mention was that we do have quite a bit of surface till there, glacial till, so it does mask a lot of the outcrop. So a lot of the geophysics and other things like mapping, terraspec mapping, alteration mapping can certainly help us get into that core area where we want to follow up with. So the next, maybe I'll just take a quick breather here and take a sip. But what I'd like to talk about next is our Centrefire project, which is in northwestern Ontario. And if you're familiar with this area, there's quite a bit of activity. There's a company here called Next Gold that's doing quite a bit of work on their Gold Lund project. Miller, Goliath, and so on is more gold-centric, but there's doing a $20,000 meter drill program there. Dryden Gold is in the area. So is Heritage Mining, and they're up in this area as well. Ashley Gold, a sister company of ours, is doing some drilling starting in the next couple of weeks on their project over on that eastern side. But Centrefire is a little bit different from some of these gold-centric areas. It is more, well, it is a VMS banded iron formation system, so it's more of a regional conductor style, and I'll show you some of the geophysics that will tell you a little bit more about that. But the VMS is an important deposit style for copper, not only copper, but gold, silver, lead, and zinc. And there's been some significant historic mines in the area. One is the Sturgeon Lake mine, which is sitting over in the same belt, the Wabigoon Belt, but sitting a little bit further east from here. Production from 1970 to the 1990s. Very high grade VMS system. So we're not alone in exploring for this style of mineralization in Northwestern Ontario. It could be very rewarding to the company and to its shareholders when we tie into something like this. So historic work, a little bit of work was done back in the 60s by Phelps Dodge, which was a fairly big copper explorer. Obviously, people know that copper prices back in those days were probably less than $1 a pound. So a little bit different criteria now for finding things. Recent highlights, well, we've done some trenching, we've done some surface sampling, mapping, and some of the nice high-grade numbers. We're getting almost 2.5% copper, over 1 gram gold per ton, and lots of distribution through the area. So we're quite keen to get in and do some drilling here. So one of the things I forgot to mention in the BC project, and it's similar here, is that we can actually drive right to the sites. We can drive the drills right to the sites. What that means is that we can keep our costs down. We can drill at a reasonably low cost compared to, say, some of the more remote parts of Ontario and BC. So our dollars can go a little further when we do some exploration here in this case. So as I mentioned, the VMS style of deposit is a regional conductor type of system. And the magnetics that you're looking at here shows that continuity of the conductors, but also the banded iron formations through this region. And we've got about 10 kilometers of strike length that goes from one end to the southwestern end up to this northeastern end of potential mineralization. And we've done spot sampling, grab sampling along this whole trend, and we're getting anomalous values even up in this northeastern part of the project. But the focus right now is in this southwestern area, and we call it the main Gossan zone. And I'll show you a little bit more about that as we go forward here. But our airborne magnetics and EM systems have showing us that we've got a good, strong correlation between the magnetic trends and the conductor trends that are the mineralization trends. Like I said, got grab samples across most of the property of cluster in here that's giving us some excellent numbers. We've looked at the historic data, and in this case too, at Centrefire, we put it all into a 3-dimensional database. We've done our magnetic and EM inversion modeling, and we've got a really good picture of what's happening here. And we're, again, really keen on getting on the ground and doing some drilling. And I'll show you where we're going to be doing most of the drilling in our first phase in 2026. As I mentioned, we had some geophysics on the area. Now, this map is telling us where the conductors are. So the conductors are the ones that have the massive sulfides, a part of that volcanogenic massive sulfide system. And this is where some of the historic work, trenching, drilling has been done. And our sampling has confirmed that, yes, there's mineralization here. So we want to get in and do some more work in this area. What we've done here, as I said, we had 10 kilometers of strike length of this system. So the magnetics are showing us that this consistent system of regional conductors, regional iron formations from one end to the other. But what's interesting here is that we found where the magnetic signatures are disturbed for whatever reason, and we think it's a structural disturbance or a hydrothermal fluid disturbance. This is where we're seeing the accumulation of mineralization on surface, at least. So this is sort of the pattern that we're looking at that we will follow up with drilling down the road. But to start with, we're going to be focusing in this area where the disturbance, it seems to be related to that surface mineralization, and the historic drilling is focusing us in here. So I'm going to show you the next slide, which is might be a little bit complicated at the start, but what it is basically showing us where the magnetic areas are, how they relate to the historic drilling that has indicated the subsurface copper, molybdenum, even gold and silver mineralization, and how that all relates. And there's a lot of interpretation here, but basically, if you can see this, our proposed drilling is going to go through this area, which we expect to have the high mineralization in the conductors, into the magnetic zone, which could be more magnetite or iron formation related, that could necessarily have more copper and gold and silver mineralization in this area. So we've got a really good target here based on traditional VMS style of mineralization profiles. So as I said, we're quite keen to get in and do some more work in this area and get in and do some drilling. This is what it looks like on surface. So very rusty, very high numbers. Again, like I said, up to 2.5% copper. So that's basically the two projects that we want to drill this year. And the plan is that, once we have our permits approved, the permits have been submitted, the permits should be approved within the next 2 weeks to a month or so. Once that happens, then we'll get on the ground and start working on. So I would say April, May into June will be the drilling season for us on those two projects. Now, to finish off here, what I'd like to just show people is that we do have other projects in British Columbia, and these are the locations. One is Bendor up in the north. It's more of a gold-centric one, very close to the Endurance Reliance project, and also Talisker's Braylorn deposit. We've got Rogers Creek and Fire Mountain, which are sitting in this magmatic arc. Very, very prolific area, but also lots of potential for copper porphyry systems. So those two projects are in that area. Now, one last thing before I go, and we may touch on this maybe in the Q&A if anybody has some questions about it, but we are helping develop a 3D prediction modeling system that takes all of the data and layers it into pattern recognition AI system. And by layering all this data together, we can get a predictive model of where we might expect to find more of copper, where we might find more moly, where we might find more gold and silver within these systems. So it's something that is up and coming. A lot of companies are starting to adapt this, and we're sort of on the cutting edge of helping a group and applying it into our own projects. So we're sort of on the leading edge of this, and very excited to be using it as well. So as sort of a summary for all of our projects: Copper Plateau drilling, Centrefire drilling, Rogers Creek permitting this year, drilling maybe late 26 or 27. Fire Mountain and Bendor, basically the same, working towards a permitting situation with future drilling. So stay tuned for results for this program.
I want to kick things off with kind of follow up to one of your last slides there. So you've kept the AI and predictive modeling angle to the story, all of the tech you're adopting. What measurable evidence do you have that this is proving exploration decisions rather than just making for a better narrative? What are you learning really from this tech?
Yeah, well, like I said, we're at the cutting edge of this, so we're developing it slightly in-house, but also with a third party called Blockware Technologies out of Calgary. So it's a work in progress for sure. What we've learned so far is by putting all of our data into it, we've been able to really look at areas that we want to get on the ground to do some more work. Now, what will be basically the turning point for seeing how practical it is when we're actually in the field and doing work. So our first drill programs will be sort of the telltale of how this can work for us. And how I see this working with the drilling side of things is that if we say, okay, well, this is where we want to drill based on the information we have now. Let's drill. Let's take some readings in the field. Let's pop that into our database and get a real-time feedback from the predictive model of how we're doing with the drilling. So we can react very quickly. And this is, I think, where the benefit is going to be when we're actually in the field taking advantage of this 3D predictivity in real time. So far, it's been a building process. It should be effective once we're on the ground and doing, the drilling program.
Okay, it sounds like, it's going to be a really interesting drill program. I think that real-time feedback is going to be so interesting to see how it transpires for the news for the next few months. So something to definitely keep an eye on and be monitoring. Speaking of the drilling programs, Rock is in with a question. Are you fully funded for drilling this year?
I would say that we're funded for one program. And I think that, the junior companies, it's kind of our business model, is that we, get a catalyst, get on the ground, get some results, and then, hopefully the share price does come up, and then we go back to the market and get a bit more money. And as I mentioned in one of our first slides, we're very cognizant of our dilution, keeping the dilution down. So we'll do it in stages. We'll do a little bit of drilling. We'll go back to the market with results. We'll probably raise some money after that, and depending on how the market is doing. So to answer your question, yes, we have some money to start at least one program, and then we'll get back to the market and maybe do one or two after that.
So when we last spoke, May 2025 was the last webinar that we did together. The Centrefire project in Ontario was largely a geophysics and target generation story. Today, as you've mentioned, you've got new high-resolution magnetics, 2026 surface assays in hand, and a submitted drill permit. What is the single most important thing the first drill campaign needs to prove for the market?
Yeah, what it has to prove is not just our thesis on, that it is a VMS system, that we're sort of tied into the right terminology, the right, the right vectoring and so on. I think what it has to show is that it could be maybe similar to, the Sturgeon Lake mine, which is the one that I mentioned earlier. It's not that far off to the east, that was in production. That was a high grade system, and I think that there maybe is not a lot of VMS discoveries that are coming up and moving forward. But I would say that there are some that are catching attention, and one of them would be Foran Mining's McIlvenny Bay in Saskatchewan, which attracted the attention of the federal government's critical metals program to move things forward in their major project system. So I think the VMS systems are maybe overlooked, underrated, and I think with us having some success in a first program to show that yes, there is a VMS system here, there is significant grade, that it could be, in perhaps a tier 1 system that we're chasing. So that's what we like to see.
Okay. You focused a lot on Centrefire and Copper Plateau today. Randy's in with a question. Are there any discussions or thoughts on optioning any of the other 3 BC properties?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what our exit strategy at the end of the day is to create value for the shareholders. And to do that, we would bring each of these projects up to a certain level. Some of them we might be able to take on our own, depending on how the market is and how we're able to raise money. Other ones, I think, we would say, if a partner wanted to come in and take on one of these things, and we've entertained that. We've actually had people on the ground doing some due diligence on 1 or 2 of our projects. So the answer would be yes. We would consider a JV, an option, an earn-in on 1 or more of our projects in British Columbia.
Now, your Copper Plateau project, which again is one of the ones in BC, has shifted from an interesting surface sample story to something that you now say could support a maiden drill program. What, in even the last 6 to 8 months, has changed your confidence level in that area?
Well, I think it's a number of things for sure. When we first looked at the project, it interested us because of the amount of data that was there. And then as we started compiling that data, we realized, some of the numbers that they're hitting there, if we were to drill that today and announce it, it would really catch a lot of attention. If you're getting 300 meters of 0.5% copper equivalency, that would really be an extraordinary number in today's market. So I think what's happened is the compilation, the ability to put all the data layers together and realize that there's not only do we have something very good there, but there's much potential for more of the same along strike on those two trends, but also within, at depth and surrounding that main zone. And obviously the price of copper coming up is really put a focus on copper companies, copper explorers, especially in that Quesnel terrain in BC, all the way up into the Toodoggone, which is really the same part of the same system. So it's sort of a perfect storm, if you want to say, of commodities, markets, and the data that we put together is created this fantastic story.
So you raised fresh capital in the end of 2025 into the beginning of this year. How are you thinking about balancing dilution against the need to generate enough drilling data to really re-rate the company?
Yeah, as I said, it is a balancing act. I think we're in a good situation because the markets are good. People are raising money for good projects like ours. So I think, as I mentioned earlier, that we'll go and raise more money incrementally. We'll do it as we have success on the ground, so that the dilution is managed as best we can. But I mean, like I said, we're in the business of taking a little bit of risk, but also creating some value for the shareholders by making those discoveries. How do we make discoveries? Well, we go out and raise a little bit of money at one step at a time, basically. So that's sort of our philosophy going forward.
Now, putting yourself in the shoes of Jeff at the end of 2026, let's look forward to the end of the year. What would be a pie in the sky ideal situation of where you'd like to see the company land with all of these target generations that you've been working on, drill validation, all of that?
Yeah, well, I would certainly like to think that this primary or phase one drilling program in each of those projects has success enough that we can go to a phase two, at least on those projects, and just follow up, not only on the main zones, but what we've built in these projects is success at the main zone then creates the ability to look further along strike. At Centrefire, we've got 10 kilometers of strike length of similar looking areas. At at Copper Plateau, we've got these other areas that we're going to investigate. So success there will hopefully breed success on the extents of these areas. So I'd love to see it like a phase two, at least on each of those. And then with the other ones, we're not sitting on our hands with the other projects. For instance, we're looking at some airborne geophysics at Fire Mountain, which will give us a little bit more information there. It's more of a green fields looking project, but some great numbers on the ground. I invite your audience today to go to our websites and look at some of our projects and some of the data from these other projects. So I think they'd be quite impressed with those. So I think that's what I'd like to see. Extended drilling through the year, progress on the other projects, and as one of your listeners asked about, maybe an option or JV on some of the other ones.
Well, you're in a favorable market right now. I think this could be a really interesting time to keep an eye on Cascade. And in regards to your other projects, you did mention they are still active. One of the last slides you showed did have that overview. So for investors to know as well that you're not sitting on your hands and things are actively happening,
Right.
I think it's an important emphasis here. Any last thoughts? What else do you want, or what's the last thought you want investors, either new to the story or who are considering a potential investment? What do you want to leave them with? Any final thoughts?
Well, I think we didn't really talk about where the copper market is going, and I think that's a point that we should discuss. When I looked at copper and the supply demand fundamentals, even back as far as 2010, I said, you know what, copper has got some great legs here. There's a huge demand worldwide, and it's not just in the the green energy transition. It's not just in the AI systems and EVs and so on. Just the fundamental demand for copper is just going, it's almost exponential. And the reason for that, I mean, I do a bit of traveling overseas. I'm in Africa, and I see the development of third world or developing countries, reaching to, a different level of demand for copper. Housing is a problem in most of the world, not just Canada. Development of affordable housing with everybody looking for appliances for their house and that kind of thing, and cars and different things. So you really see that demand worldwide for copper. So that's something to keep in mind. It's not just a blip on the radar here. We're going to see copper demand increasing, continue to increase over the next 10 years or more, I think. So I think to get into the copper space now, to get into a company that, like Cascade Copper, that is feeding the food chain of copper development and production, I think an investor will do well at this point.
All very valid thoughts. Thank you for joining me today, Jeff. Thank you to everybody who is on the live stream and who watched the replay. Just a reminder, it will be available. So if you would like to watch it, head over to the Cascade website where you can see the replay of this. Thank you again for joining me, and we'll see you all next time.